Hello and welcome to this video resource for ACT, the App Association members in the UK. Now, our members talk to us a lot about accessing funding and funding their innovation. And so we wanted to put something together that will be useful for you to help navigate that complex landscape. I'm Stephen Tulip. I'm the UK Membership and Engagement Manager at the App Association, and I'm joined today by Sandy Findlay, who is Partnership Manager at ABGI. Now, that's Sandy's job title, but actually I think of him more as the fount of all knowledge of R&D tax credits, patent box, funding. He really does know his stuff. So welcome, Sandy.
Thanks, Stephen. It's nice to be here today, and thanks for that glowing introduction. What I want to try and do today, Stephen, is to give the viewers a better appreciation of where or what types of funding there is and where that funding fits into the product development cycle. So we'll look at grant funding, we'll look at R&D tax relief, we'll look at patent box, and if we have time, we can look at some commercial sources of funding as well, yeah.
Fantastic. And I think that's going to be a really useful overview. So just to explain our membership to you, Sandy. So our members in the UK are a mix of software developers, app makers, and connected device manufacturers. And almost all of them are SMEs or micro businesses. So we want them to take away some practical tips and advice to save themselves some money and to make that complex innovation journey a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah. But a bit about ourselves to put it in context for the viewers as well. ABGI is an international consulting group. We work with clients to accelerate their innovation activity, and we do that by identifying and securing appropriate forms of funding. That's generally grant funding, tax incentives, and in some instances where it's appropriate, commercial funding. We work across 28 countries around the world. We have 200 specialists. And last year we managed 1.6 billion euros worth of incentives. Much more importantly, in the UK, we managed about 35 million pounds worth of grants and tax incentives last year.
Fantastic. So we're definitely speaking to the right person. Now, before I hand over to you, Sandy, to go through what you want to talk about, just to flag a couple of things up that were interesting from my point of view. So when we've talked in the past, there's things like R&D tax credits, which I'm aware of, and I'm sure a lot of our members are aware of and might even do themselves. But actually, there are a lot of tips and tricks that you can share that means that they will be able to maximize the benefit they can get from them. And it's always worth businesses taking another look at that to make sure that they are making the most out of it. Then there's other things like patent box, for example, which were new to me and I think will be interesting to a lot of our members. And also this, the journey through the product development cycle is something that will be of particular interest as well. So without any further ado, Sandy, I'll hand over to you, ask you to share your slides, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, that's who we are, ABGI. And if we got onto the right slide, that's the commercial part. I did that earlier. I thought it was worthwhile just starting and giving you a broad overview about a software project lifecycle. I focused on software because I know that half of the members of ACT tend to work in software and app development. Some of you are involved in device development as well. So what I say today will be equally as appropriate. Later on, we'll talk about the types of activity that are eligible in software development, and I'll also talk about eligible activity in product development as well at the same time. So typically companies move through a product development cycle. They have early stages where they're testing concepts. They then move into developing the business case. They bring staff on, or they put together a project team. They work on defining the requirements for the project. They then move into proof of concept, or they move into development itself. And through that process, we tend to find that different types of funding are appropriate at different stages. So very often, people often ask me about grant funding. Everybody wants grants because grants are free money. Never believe that a grant's free money because it's not. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of effort in putting an application together for a grant. So grants aren't free. They tend to be in the early stages of a product development cycle. So somewhere around stage 4 through to stage 6 or stage 7. Why is that? Because most grants fund technical risk and technical challenge. So those are the areas where the technical risk tend to be highest and where the chances of technical failure tend to be greatest. I have to say that companies have to be really careful when they're putting grant funding into their project funding proposal and plan, because just the very nature of grant applications is in the UK that they're competitive, so you can never be guaranteed that you're going to get a specific grant. What I would say is be very specific about the grant application itself. So make sure you've looked at a good fit between the grant source and the particularly in terms of the technical challenges you're facing, the area of technology, and the application if the technology development is successful. Because if you can be more specific about those and more targeted in where you apply for grants, you will tend to have a higher success rate. So grant funding, the ones that most companies tend to be much more interested in are around R&D tax relief and patent box. R&D tax relief tends to work from stage 7 right through to product launch because it's a tax benefit back to the company based on the spend on addressing technical challenges, advancing the baseline of science and technology. So it's once your activity starts, you will be doing eligible work and spending money on eligible activities. Patent box tends to be in the much later stages. Once the product is launched, you'll apply for the patent, you'll get the patent grant, the product's launched, and once you start making a profit from the sale of services or goods which use the patented device, that's when you can apply for patent box, and that's when you can reap the benefit of it. So it's much more about a long-term tax benefit over the life of the patent or over the commercialization of that patent. So to move on, because I know that obviously we want to tackle some of these issues and get a bit more detail around the R&D tax relief and patent box, but R&D tax relief is a UK incentives, and it's there to encourage UK companies to invest in innovation, and particularly in innovation that will drive the baseline of knowledge and understanding in industry or in technology and science. For SMEs, the broad benefit is 25% relief on eligible spend if the company's in profit. If an SME is in a loss-making position, companies can surrender their losses and they can claim up to 33.35% cash back on their eligible spend. Then for larger companies who are having to claim through the RDEC scheme, or for SMEs who have grants subsidising their R&D, then there's a net benefit of 9.5% on all eligible spend. Again, that 10.5% might be tax relief if the company's in profit, or it can be taken as a cash payment if the company's in a temporary loss-making position.
Sorry, Sandy, can I just jump in with a quick question there? You mentioned the RDEC scheme. Could you explain what that is, please?
Yes, RDEC is research and development expenditure credits. They apply to companies in the UK who have more than 500 staff or a turnover in excess of £84 million and or a balance sheet in excess of 65 million. So it is for much bigger companies, but you have to be careful because SMEs who receive state aid grants, those tend to be things like Innovate UK grants, those companies will need to put the total expenditure for the project which is receiving grant subsidy through the RDEC scheme. So again, companies often take grants at the early stage of a project and don't realise the impact of that grant on future R&D tax reliefs. I would say to companies, always check with a specialist before you claim a grant or before you put the application in for a grant, because even if you don't draw down the funds from the grant, if you're in receipt of an offer of grant funding and you've accepted that grant funding, that will push your project into the RDEC scheme. So that's RDEC. Stephen, is that enough?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good. Okay, the next thing is what qualifies for R&D tax relief. There are three broad criteria that are accepted in the UK or recognised in the UK. The first thing is that companies have to be undertaking projects that seek an advance in science or technology. The definition of that advance is the important thing. So companies always have to look at a particular R&D or innovation project, and they have to be aware of the level of science or technology, or the baseline of science and technology, the understanding at the start of the project, and they then have to look at where they move that baseline over the course of the project. And HMRC will be looking for a clear definition of how they have advanced that baseline in their claim. The second area qualifying companies is companies need to be undertaking or addressing scientific or technological uncertainties. Those are technical challenges which have no existing or obvious solution, and where a competent professional recognises that the company requires to undertake some systematic research and investigation to resolve the technical challenge. So that puts the requirement for the third qualifying criteria, which is work needs to be undertaken by competent professionals, because it's those competent professionals who are able to define what the advance in science or technology is and what the technological uncertainties that were addressed are. Now, the interesting thing is that companies should be aware that projects need to seek an advance in science or technology and address technical uncertainties, but you don't have to be successful in the project to claim R&D tax relief. So often when we're working with clients, we're looking for the projects that have failed and have failed for technical reasons, because those tend to show greater eligibility than the projects that are successful, because often the technical challenges being faced are greater. So that's the three criteria you have to be aware of. And then the other thing that most companies tend to be interested in is what are the eligible costs that give rise to tax relief or tax benefit. The biggest area of cost tends to be around staffing costs, because it's people who do the R&D generally. So your staff's time involved in addressing those technical challenges, often a proportion of the time of other staff in the company supporting the individuals doing the R&D can be eligible, particularly for companies involved in product development, raw materials. So if companies are involved in developing prototypes, testing prototypes, then the costs involved in those raw materials putting prototypes together will qualify for relief. The acquisition of particular types of software. So if a company needs to buy a particular piece of software to allow them to address a technical uncertainty, then we can claim for relief on that software. Much more recently, in the last 12 months, HMRC has announced that it will allow companies to claim relief against cloud computing costs. So those tend to be the costs that are associated with acquiring, storing, analyzing, and interpreting big data. So again, particularly in the area of software development, app development, but also in product development. So very often we work in aerospace and automotive, and when companies are developing new designs, new shapes for vehicles or for aircraft, there's a lot of data analysis on the impact of the change in design on the aerodynamics. That work will qualify for R&D tax relief in the future. Companies can claim relief against subcontractor costs only if they're claiming through the SME scheme. and they will be allowed to claim relief against 65% of subcontractor costs. It's an area that HMRC are turning more attention to more recently. So what I would say to companies is, if you're subcontracting elements of your R&D out, be careful to talk to an R&D specialist before you start the project and get some advice and some guidance on whether the eligibility for the R&D tax relief will be yours or it will be the subcontractors. And then the final area would be relief against externally provided workers. So if you're using umbrella companies to bring additional staff in, if you're deploying staff from a sister company or a partner company, there will be relief against some of the costs or proportions of the cost for those staff. Again, when I was speaking to Stephen about doing this presentation this morning, one of the things we did talk about was the prevalence of patenting and licensing within the apps development arena. So often when I'm talking to software companies or to software associations, patenting is much less important, but I think it is to your own members, Stephen. So Patent Box is, again, a corporation tax regime which in the UK allows companies access to a preferential corporation tax rate of 10% on profits from the commercialization of patents registered in the UK IPO or with the European Patent Office. There are also special treatment for companies who have registered intellectual property with the 13 EEA countries as well. And medicinal and botanical IP rights qualify for Patent Box as well. The preferential corporation tax rate of 10% applies to all profits accrued over the life of the patent. Companies can also claim Patent Box if they have exclusive licenses on patented inventions developed and exploited by the licensee and defended by the licensee. So if you're licensing exclusive use from a third party, and that third party then infers you the right to defend their patent in a particular market, in a geography, or in an industrial vertical, you will still qualify for Patent Box. Basically, once a company has an exclusive license or it has a patent granted, the company can then on an annual basis calculate a Patent Box profit. The Patent Box profit comes from revenue streams from global sales of the patented product itself, or products incorporating one or more patented inventions. So the companies in your membership who are developing devices, they may have a number of patented devices that make that particular device work faster, better. The sale or the revenue from the sale of that product that incorporates more than one patented invention would qualify for Patent Box. It may be the sale on bespoke parts that are used in patented products. So again, I'm thinking of additive manufacturing, 3D printing. If a particular 3D printer has a patented protection on a part of the printer, and the manufacturer sells a specific cartridge for substrate, then they can claim Patent Box relief on the revenues from the sale of the substrate cartridges as well. You can also claim relief against license fees, royalties, and the proceeds of a sale of a patent. And then finally, compensation or damages resulting from patent infringements go into your annual patent profit. And what happens is on an annual basis, you record the revenue streams from the relevant sales for the patent. You look at any costs that you've incurred in maintaining the patent. Those come off, that will give you a Patent Box profit. That Patent Box profit is deducted from your gross corporation tax profit, and then they're both entered separately on your CT600. So it's as simple as that. The one thing I would say to companies is to be aware that you can't actually claim patent box relief until your patent is granted. But once the patent is granted, you can make a 2-year retrospective claim for patent box, as you would with R&D tax relief. So in the early stages of the process of commercialization, it may be worthwhile a company looking at claiming relief against the 2 previous years prior to patent grant. Again, your patent box specialist should be able to advise you on that, Stephen.
Thanks, Sandy. That's really interesting. And I think, you know, this patent box is a particular interest because before we sat down to record this, I spoke to a few of our members, and, you know, the issue of IP and profiting from your IP is something that's always at the forefront of their minds. And this is another interesting element to that. And I think it's perhaps something that a lot of our members may not have been aware of. So, oh, sorry, Sandy, you're going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think our experience is that most of the UK businesses know about R&D tax relief. It's very well publicised. It's a mature product now or program. Patent box is much less widely known. So I think in the last year that I saw figures, there were 66,000 R&D tax relief claims in the UK, but there were only 1,350 patent box claims. Mm. So it's much less widely known. And to be fair, this isn't a criticism of patent attorneys or accountants, but often your patent attorney wouldn't be thinking about patent box because it's not their area of expertise. So they're focused on patent applications and policing patents that have been granted. So the tax element's less of an issue for them. And similarly, the accountant wouldn't necessarily be thinking of patent box because he's probably not aware that the company has a patent. Or, you know, they may see some of the patent costs coming through, but they see them retrospectively. So they see them a year or 18 months after the costs have been incurred. So it's one of the tax reliefs that fall between a number of stools. So if companies are working in IP areas, if they have formalized IP of any type at all, speak to a specialist and find out what your position on patent box is.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's where specialists like yourself are so valuable to SMEs, because as you say, this funding a lot of the time is at the point where a lot of different specialisms intersect. And if you're an SME or a micro business, you don't have the time and resources to be, you know, across all of those different things all of the time. So, you know, people like yourself are there to help achieve that and help these businesses save money that they perhaps weren't aware was on the table.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on to the next thing we're going to talk about briefly is, I mentioned earlier that a significant proportion of ACT, the App Association's members, are either software developers or app developers. Do you have any advice specifically for those types of businesses? Yeah,
it's interesting because, as you know, Stephen, and a lot of our clients tend to be in engineering manufacturing, but I do from time to time speak to software developers because they're our second largest source of business. So I try and clearly differentiate between the two. So in terms of software development, our consultants tell me that the areas where they find most eligible activity tend to be in these 9 areas. So we find fintech and legal tech in particular have a lot of eligibility. So it tends to be around the development of new applications and often the data management within those applications. So it's passing data from one system to another. It's aggregating data from disparate systems into one point. Cloud computing, we have a lot of companies who use cloud computing. And so within cloud computing, it'll be around things like using APIs to draw data from one app to another. It can be around communications protocols, those types of things. Systems integration, again, as companies' computing requirements become more complex, then the need to integrate one system with another, and particularly the pressure from the development of IoT, those integration issues will drive technical challenges that require R&D within them to resolve. Video games development is a big area. Energy efficient computing, particularly in the last 8 to 10 years. So companies who are looking to reduce the heat generated from server farms or the amassing together of servers, companies looking to use that particular heat if they can. So again, if you've got a large server farm, how do we draw that heat off and use it? How do we reduce the use of electricity or the consumption of electricity in the servers themselves? AI, AR, VR, all of those areas are rife with R&D tax relief at the moment. And then big data itself. So particularly as we see the growth of the internet and IoT, as companies start to look at the benefits of central computing versus edge computing, as we start to see a greater reliance on satellite technology and space for industry, that generates big data issues in terms of acquiring data, storing that data, analyzing it, interpreting it. So all of, again, they're all the same sort of issues. They're around communications protocols, they're around designing new architectures, those types of things. Those would be the areas we'd be looking for software developers in particular to be having issues, problems that require that systematic research and investigation, and so will qualify for R&D. In terms of the apps developers themselves, I put some ideas together last week with one of our consultants. We believe that designing and deploying large sensor networks generates a lot of challenges. So the larger number of sensors you have, the harder it is to keep those networked. Sensors as devices tend to be vulnerable to working and not working. So it's maintaining that consistency, that continuity of the network. It's then about using the information or pulling the information together from the sensor network and bring it into one point. So it's that transferability and communication. That leads me on to the next point, which is about big data collection and analysis and storage. So when people start deploying apps, they tend to have the need to work with large collections of data, and often that data is disparate across different networks. So what are the right communications protocols to make the network work? And that leads nicely into the final point, which is around development of IoT communications protocols. So devices within a mesh or within a network recognize the other devices they're speaking to, understand the nature of that device, and understands the nature of the communication between themselves and the other devices in the network. So those tend to be
the IoT piece. Sorry, Sandy, the IoT piece is really important for our members, because a lot of the points where our members interact are around that Internet of Things piece. So we have members who make things like remote Bluetooth sensors that collect data in factory environments, let's say, or medical environments. Then other ones of our members create software that do very clever things with that data. And that connectivity piece, as you said, is crucial to a very broad ecosystem of businesses. And it sounds like that they can all benefit from the tax credits and other things that you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think what I tend to say to companies, whether they're in the service space or software or manufacturing, I always say to companies, think about the challenges you have on a daily basis, which make you stop and scratch your head and think, how do we do this? Because if you're stopping and thinking about how do we do this, the chances are there's a technical challenge in there. If your answer is How do we do this? And your answer is, there's a manual I can go and read. I can go and Google this. There's a forum I can go and ask the question of. Then it's not R&D. But if that question then solicits the response of, well, I need to go and do some research, I need to go and do some trial and error here, then that tends to indicate there's R&D eligibility in it, Stephen.
So I think the next point we're going to talk about is, we've talked about the software development side, and as you've said, that a lot of the companies that you work with are more traditional manufacturers, and in our members' case, that would be connected device manufacturers by and large. So have you got any advice specifically for those types of businesses?
Yeah, again, it's around the projects you're involved in, because we tend to, when we first speak to companies, the first thing we say to them is, what projects have you been involved in the last year, which have been focused on? And we usually look at results. In terms of manufacturing and product design, we tend to focus companies' activity on what are the projects which have been aimed at making things smaller, faster, lighter, cheaper, stronger. Because all of those projects will present challenges. You know, if we're making a device smaller, a mobile phone, the smaller that device becomes, the more difficult it is to fit all of the necessary components in. It creates challenges in terms of the circuitry itself. It creates challenges in terms of the device overheating or dissipating heat away from the device. And there may even be electromagnetic radiation issues in it as well as it gets smaller. So those types of projects are always rife with technical challenges. And if there's no obvious or existing solution to that technical challenge, it's eligible for R&D. On the other hand, projects that make things safer, greener, more reliable will throw up challenges as well. So companies are often looking at how they use more recyclable material in their products. Well, using recycled material or recyclable material creates issues in the manufacturing process itself. Those challenges will probably qualify for R&D tax relief. And again, making things safer. How do we provide better EMC shields? How do we reduce the risk of people getting electric shocks from particular products? You know, it's all of those things which will create the technical challenges that the design engineers then have to sit down and work through and come up with solutions. So for manufacturers, for people designing devices, I would start with this slide. And then from that, it's okay, when you made this device smaller or lighter, what were the issues that you had you scratching your head thinking, how do we do this?
What are some steps that the companies can go away and take immediately that will start to make a difference?
I think the first thing is in terms of grant funding, because I know that speaking to companies on a regular basis, particularly companies in the new tech area, they're always frustrated about grant funding because they hear about so much grant funding available, but never seem to have a lot of success in winning that funding. I would go back to a point I made earlier on, is be very specific about the sources of funding that you're applying to. So most companies I speak to raise the issue of Innovate UK smart grants. Now, in Innovate UK's defence, I have to say, it's the most widely known grant source in the UK, and it's regularly oversubscribed to about 4 or 5 times. So even if you have the best application in the world, you've only got a 1 in 4 chance of getting the money. There are other more specific sources of funding available. So go back to those 3 questions about what's the technology that we're working in, what's the specific technical challenges we face, and what are the industrial or business applications if we're successful, because that may drive you into other areas. So one of the funds that we have used quite successfully in the last few years is the Defence and Security Accelerator, which has funds available to support projects developing new technologies that have defence or security applications. Now, you may not be developing your application specifically for defence, but if the technology has a defence application, then there's an opportunity to get up to 100% grant for a £130,000 project. So that's certainly worth looking at. But there are also healthcare specific projects and funds which are available. And I think companies just need to apply a bit more thought in terms of the grant funding. In terms of R&D tax relief, I think companies, technical teams need to start keeping a regular log. We try and get our companies disciplined in building an R&D log on a regular basis. So what are the projects you're working on? What are the technical challenges? What did you propose that you did? And what did you actually do? That makes it much easier at the end of the year for an organization like ourselves to write that technical report and justify the R&D tax relief for the company. Could I add something else in there? I've just realized that I haven't mentioned this, but both Innovate UK and DASA now have loan funds available. They both start around, I think DASA starts at 100,000, Innovate UK is at 200 or 250,000, but they go up to about £1.5 million loan funds. Now, to qualify for an Innovate UK grant, your project needs to be fairly technically challenging. You know, they're looking for the really technically risky stuff. But if your project's already progressed down the technology line, you can still apply for Innovate UK innovation loans. And again, the DASA fund is particularly available to support companies that have developed technology which needs commercial exploitation. So companies who have already addressed the technical risk and don't have that risk available to apply for grants or to qualify for grants should be looking at these sources of loan as well.
Thank you, Sandy. Now I'm going to amalgamate all of our questions that we've had into one last question, if that's okay. So I think what we've learned today is that the funding landscape for SMEs and businesses in general is a complex one. There is a lot to take into account. There are areas that are well known, like R&D tax credits, areas that are not so well known, like patent box, and a myriad of different funding sources, organizations, etc. Now, I think mapping if you're an SME, sitting down to map all of that out yourself is a nigh on impossible task when you've got the job of running a business at hand. So Sandy, what can our members contact you? Can they speak to you and your colleagues, and can you help them navigate that complex landscape?
Yeah, definitely, Stephen. We're always more than happy to talk to companies. We always say to companies, we'd rather have a 15-minute or half-hour conversation with a company and be able to say to them, no, you don't qualify for a grant or you don't qualify for R&D tax relief, than to speak to a company and say, if we'd spoken to you a year ago or 2 years ago, we could have gotten you. So never be frightened to pick up the phone or to send me an email. Our initial conversations are always free. We'll want to be sure that there is an eligible grant application there, or that the company can do a robust R&D tax relief claim before we'll engage in commercial contracts. So yeah, more than happy to talk to companies. For your own members, we'll offer them a 10% discount on our commercial rates. So they've nothing to lose in terms of contacting us. And at least that way, they can go forward with much more confidence in terms of their qualification for relevant forms of funding.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Sandy. And I do appreciate that. What I'll do now is just wrap up. And I think the main message I've taken away from there is, speak to Sandy. If you have questions on this, you want to know if there's some money on the table that you are not aware of. And now I'll be honest here, this isn't the first time that Sandy and I have shared a panel. And I know for a fact that he has taken some companies from a position of not thinking they were going to get any money back to getting some very, very big amounts of money back. And that's been transformative for those businesses. And we keep talking about SMEs because that's who our members are. And if you can get access to some funds that weren't expecting, it can boost your innovation, years ahead of where it otherwise would have been. It can be the difference between, hiring that new member of staff or investing in that new premises. So, please do take those steps that Sandy has described. We will share the slides along with this video. We'll share Sandy's contact details, or you can contact me and I'll put you in touch with Sandy. But I'd just like to wrap up by saying thank you very much. Sandy, that was a lot to get through, and I think we did it in a good amount of time. You did a good job there of certainly helping me understand it and our members too. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time, Stephen. I really appreciate it. And as Stephen said, look, don't hesitate at all. Pick up the phone, ping us an email, and we'll sort you out.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. No worries. Thanks, Stephen.